Everyone hears those wild tales and myths about the supernatural as they are growing up, and the majority of children trust those stories without question. At the age of 12, I resided in a sizable suburban community. There were trees all over it, particularly massive pine and maple trees that loomed over the homes. For a child, the neighborhood appeared large, although it wasn't really that large. It was dubbed the scary house. That area really made me nervous. It was the subject of countless stories. It seems that one night, a rider in the area vanished and his bike was discovered on the house's roof. A group of builders attempted to demolish the house, but a winged creature drove them away. The 13 or so spirits that inhabited it were my favorite. They were all distinct in their abilities. You could always be seen by one person and heard by another. I never truly believed this nonsense, and as I grew older, my skepticism only grew. In my neighborhood, there were two pals who were older than the others. There was one who was a bit of a jerk. Alan was his name, and he was continually making foolish decisions. However, he wasn't bothersome enough for us to despise him. By the end of October, the streets were decked out in Halloween decorations. I was riding my bike home with Alan, my other friend David, and myself after school. You know what would be sick, dude? Alan yelled for us. I said, only partially listening, "What?" "We should really visit the scary house this Halloween." You realize how foolish that would be? We would get into a lot of problems if we were caught. Even if it is abandoned, that shit is illegal, so they might call the cops, David told him sternly. Alan yelled back, "Don't be afraid, guys. I can get us all in without anyone knowing." I thought this notion may be entertaining, even though it did sound a little dumb. I had always been curious about the interior. Since most of the windows were boarded up, we were never able to view it. I told Alan, "I'll ask Jim if he wants to go." "John, dude, stop being such a moron," David shouted at me. "Everything will work out all right, buddy." "It will be fun, dude," I said. David cast his gaze downward. At last he answered, "All right, I'll give it some thought." As the days passed, the streets were adorned with decorations. Anything from pop-up ghosts, skeletons, and monsters to jack-o'-lanterns. Jim and Alan's friend Elliot both consented to visit the house, but David took his time making a choice. Every day at school, we would nag him to accompany us. He eventually consented to accompany us on a Friday, the day before Halloween. He simply gave in to peer pressure, in my opinion. His only requirement was that we only spend an hour inside. At last, Halloween has arrived. I had spent the entire day eating candy while watching horror movie marathons on television networks. "So, John, what are you going to do tonight?" When she arrived home from work, my mother questioned me. I didn't tell her about Alan and Elliot since my parents didn't like them and believed they were a negative influence. Instead, I said, "I'm going out with Jim and David." "Are you not too old to play tricks on me?" My mother gave a small laugh. "No, I purchased a dinosaur costume that appears to be capable of frightening the living daylights out of people. Free candy, too," I informed her with pride. "All right, do whatever you want and avoid trouble, and avoid being harmed." "I won't, Mom." About 6 o'clock was when the sun started to set. Anxious children were already ringing our doorbells and pleading for candy by that point. They were all dressed in various outfits, anything from robots to clowns to ghosts. It was my responsibility to distribute the sweets to the children. I heard a loud knock on my door at about 8:30 p.m. I expected to see more children at the door, but instead I saw David and Jim, who were not dressed up, requesting candy. David said, "You ready to go, dude?" "Yes, sir. I'll be back in an hour, Mom." Before I left my residence, I let out a scream. Jim and David were seated on the sidewalk with their bikes. I returned with the gray bike after going to my garden to retrieve mine. Man, "Are you certain you want to do this?" I was questioned again by David. "Hey everyone, are you all set?" When we walked up, Elliot grinned. Alan was wearing a backpack and both of them had flashlights. It took some time for other people to fully understand it. A bunch of adolescents waiting outside an abandoned house on Halloween looked quite suspicious, so fortunately, no police officers passed by. We jumped into the overgrown backyard after scaling the fence. A stone seat was overturned, and an automobile that appeared to be from the 1970s was parked in the garage. Alan ran straight up to the back door and turned the handle, which was made of rusty bronze and caught on the lock. Alan and Elliot switched on their flashlights and intervened. We trailed behind. Every piece of furniture was covered in white sheets, and dust was everywhere. I got shivers down my back. When we arrived in the kitchen, Alan removed his backpack and produced a black box. After placing the box on the table, he took out a board and another item. It turned out to be an Ouija board when Elliot shone his spotlight on it. My heart fell. "Oh, no," Jim shouted. He hadn't spoken all night until now. Despite his shyness as a child, Jim enjoyed watching scary movies. However, he had always believed that such things were too far, and he shared my genuine fear of them. "Jeez, people, please relax. You need to do more than just glance around this place." He smiled slyly and said, "There's only one true way to know if this is haunted." Elliot and Alan took a seat. After a brief moment of hesitation, I followed them. I had always been advised by my parents not to play this game, but now I was intrigued. David gave me a disapproving look. Jim's gaze flitted between David and the three of us. At last, he made the decision to take a seat at the table. "All right, are you here with us?" Alan gave David a smile. David let out a deep breath and took a seat. "Good," Alan responded contentedly. We all placed our hands on the glass cup after he placed it upside down on the board. Elliot was trying not to laugh and had a small smile on his face as though he wasn't taking it seriously. Alan said out loud, "Is there anyone here that would like to talk to us?" Elliot giggled. We waited and waited, but nothing happened. "Stop teasing us, you're acting that way." David's face was stern as he regarded Alan. "I'm not doing anything, I promise." On Christmas, Alan sounded like a small child. From J to I to M it went. Jim looked up with a nervous expression as his eyes grew wide. The table started to tremble. The table was enveloped in darkness as the two flashlights went out. He exclaimed out loud, "This is nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. It's total insanity. Everyone's life constitutes an inversion of the paradigm." David yelled into the night, "What the fuck just happened?" Slowly, my eyes adjusted. Except for Jim, everyone was seated. He stood motionless, staring straight ahead. "You're right, there are no ghosts in here," Jim replied to David in a calm voice, before drawing out the poker and letting the lifeless body slide to the floor. I got up and followed Elliot and Alan to the door, knocking over the table in my excitement. As I raced out of the home, I heard Jim chuckling behind me. Alan and Elliot were already waiting for me on their motorcycles. "Come, let's go!" they shouted as I jumped on my Fermi. We swiftly took off, leaving the house behind us. As we passed trick-or-treaters, we pedaled as hard as we could down the sidewalk. "Guys, we need to stop and talk about this," I said to Elliot and Alan, but they didn't listen. "Guys!" I yelled. This time, they halted. "What in the world was that, yo?" Elliot's voice was tremulous. Jim clearly lost his mind. Alan answered, "I knew that kid was always too quiet." I've known him for nearly my entire existence. I answered, he's quiet, but not a psychopath. You also witnessed the spotlights breaking and the table trembling. I went on, no human could do that without touching them. Do you mean that he is possessed? That's not feasible, Alan stated angrily. Dude, who gives a damn? Either way, he's become a killer. Elliot stated, we must go to our parents' house and call the police. We chose to go to my house because it was the closest. To get to my place, we pedaled faster than I believe any of us had ever done. We parked our bikes in the driveway after arriving in just under a minute. I opened the rear door and entered. You're home, Mom and Dad. As I entered the living room, my voice trailed off. The walls and the floor were covered in blood. Whether possessed or not, I'm gonna kill that piece of shit, was the last thing I spoke. Reaching for the house phone, I dialed 911. The response was, hello, what's your emergency? I started talking frantically. My friend killed our other friend and my parents as well, and when we went to an abandoned house, I muttered hastily. Calm down, sir. Can I have your... The phone cut off. So did the lights. Yo, it's not safe here. Elliot said, we have to go somewhere else. We were sitting ducks if we stayed here, but I was barely able to think. After leaving the house, we made our way to the driveway via the garage. The streetlights were flickering and our bikes were gone. With the exception of the one at the end of the block, they turned off one by one. The black outline of a motionless person was visible beneath it. Although I was unable to identify the person, I had a suspicion that it was someone bad.